The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called after only 18 standard hours of what the humans casually referred to as Tuesday. Supreme Chancellor Kethvar of the Altarian hegemony stood at the podium, his four arms trembling with barely contained panic as he addressed the assembled representatives. "Honored delegates," his voice cracked through the universal translator, "we must implement an immediate ceasefire with the human faction. The situation has escalated beyond all reasonable parameters." In the observation gallery, Admiral Jackson Mitchell leaned back in his chair, a half-eaten sandwich in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. His uniform was rumpled, his hair disheveled, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Which, to be fair, he hadn't. But the grin on his face was absolutely radiant. "Ceasefire?" he called out, his voice echoing through the chamber's sophisticated acoustics. "What ceasefire? We're just getting warmed up." The Zalurian ambassador's tentacles writhed into stress. "Admiral Mitchell, in the past 18 hours, your species has somehow managed to capture 12 of our supposedly impregnable fortress worlds, liberate 6 slave colonies, redirect 3 asteroid mining operations to feed refugee populations, and," he paused to check his datapad, "apparently turned our most secure prison moon into what your people are calling a therapeutic wellness retreat." "Oh, that," Mitchell waved dismissively. "Yeah, the boys in engineering thought the prisoners might enjoy some actual sunlight for once. Crazy concept, right? Who knew that treating sentients like actual beings would boost morale?" Counselor Vexhigh stood on shaking legs. "But how? Our fortress worlds have defensive arrays that have held for millennia. The mathematical probability of breaching even one should have required decades of siege warfare." Mitchell took a sip of his coffee and shrugged. "Well, when your impregnable defenses are all designed to keep people out, they're not so great at keeping people in. Especially when those people happen to be the slaves you've been using to maintain your systems for the past few centuries." The silence in the chamber was deafening. "Turns out," Mitchell continued conversationally, "when you treat people like property for long enough, they get real motivated to help anyone who shows up with bolt cutters and a better offer. Who could have predicted that?" The Karathi delegate's crystalline form flickered with agitation. "This is impossible. Our strategic computers calculated that any assault on our positions would require at least 50,000 ships and result in millions of casualties. You attacked with barely 300 vessels." "See, that's your problem right there," Mitchell said, standing up and stretching. "Your computers are probably fantastic at calculating traditional warfare, fleet movements, supply lines, attrition rates, all that good stuff. But they're not so great at calculating what happens when you give desperate people hope and angry people a target." He gestured toward the main display, which showed real-time footage of liberated worlds. On screen after screen, former slaves and oppressed populations were working alongside human forces, not as conscripts but as partners. They were rebuilding infrastructure, establishing new governments, creating something that looked suspiciously like civilization. "You want to know the real difference?" Mitchell asked, his tone becoming serious for the first time. "We don't see conquest, we see liberation. We're not trying to take your stuff, we're trying to give it back to the people you stole it from." The Chancellor's voice was barely a whisper. "But the economic implications, the established order, the treaties." "Yeah, about those treaties," Mitchell said, pulling out a stack of documents and dropping them on the floor. "Turns out they're not worth much when they're written by slavers, for slavers, to protect slavers. Funny how that works." He moved toward the exit, then paused. "Oh, and Chancellor, you might want to update your tactical computers. They're about to get a whole lot more confused. See, we just figured out how to mass-produce that faster-than-light communication tech you've been hoarding for the past 1,000 years. Every oppressed population in the galaxy is about to start talking to each other." The door slid shut behind him, leaving the council in stunned silence. In the corridor outside, Mitchell's aide was waiting with a status report. Sir, the liberation fleets are requesting new orders. The hegemony worlds are surrendering faster than we can process them. Mitchell grinned and reached for his communicator. All ships, this is Admiral Mitchell. The Council wants a ceasefire. He paused for effect. Tell them we'll consider it right after we finish liberating the rest of their slaves. But the humans weren't finished. Colony Station Epsilon, Admiral Torres's voice was gentler now, but no less intense. We're detecting massive damage to your life support systems and food production facilities. We're deploying repair teams and emergency supplies immediately. Medical teams are standing by. Tevrin watched as human ships swarmed around the damaged colony like worker insects around a wounded hive. Emergency supply drops, medical shuttles, engineering teams. The humans had brought everything needed for a complete humanitarian operation. Captain Tevrin, his communications officer, called out, "We're being hailed by the human fleet." The face that appeared on his screen was weathered and scarred, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much. Admiral Torres looked exactly like what she was, a warrior who had chosen to carry the weight of strangers' suffering on her shoulders. "Captain," she said simply, "we could use your sensor array to help coordinate rescue operations. Your people have a reputation for precision navigation. Would you be willing to assist?" Tevrin stared at her. This human, this stranger from a species he'd barely heard of, was asking for help saving people she'd never met on the other side of the galaxy from her home. "Admiral," he found himself asking, "why? Why did you come? These people, they're not your species, not your allies, not even in your territory. You gained nothing by answering their call." Admiral Torres was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her words were simple, but they carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because they called," she said. "And when someone calls for help, humans answer." In the days that followed, as human ships worked tirelessly to rebuild what the Korthak had destroyed, word spread throughout the sector. A new precedent had been set. For the first time in galactic history, someone had answered a distress call not for profit, not for political advantage, not for strategic gain. They had answered simply because it was the right thing to do. The message rippled outward through the galaxy's communication networks, carried by every species that witnessed what had happened at Colony Station Epsilon. In the Outer Rim territories, where pirates and raiders had operated with impunity for generations, the news was received with particular interest. For the first time in centuries, the predators realized they might have something to fear, because now, when the innocent called for help, the humans would answer.